Hello, my crafty friends. It's Michelle, the Southern Shell, and I am here with another Talented Creators collaboration. This is an open playlist with our host, Aurea, with DIY with Aurea, and Loli with Loli D's Creations. Our guest host is a Lady Red Crafting. Links to their channel and the playlist will be in my description box below. Thank you guys. This is an older video that I wanted to reshare for the winter scene. Let's jump in. Hello, my crafty friends. It's Michelle, the Southern Shell, and I'm going to share with you the process that I did to create a wintry Hobbit scene. I'm using some old stuff. This is an old cutting board, and I'm going to have to sand down that side where it broke. I'm going to use some barbecue skewers that I got at probably Kroger. They weren't very expensive. And 3 different wine corks that I've had in my stash. I'm going to use my little miter snips right there, and those cut very nicely through that cork. I'm going to leave 1 cork whole. I'm going to cut 1 cork right in half, and then the 3rd cork, I'm just going to cut about 1/3 of it off so that it's going to give me different heights. Those are going to be my tree trunks. I'm using 4 skewers. Now, I think these are 9.75 inches, and I'm going to measure each one of them. And one I'm going to cut at about 8.5 inches, and I'm going to just measure with my ruler there, and I'm going to come in and cut the next one at 6 inches, and I'm going to cut one at 7. And I'm trying to remember, I think I cut 3 inches, 3.5 inch off the bottom of one, and I use those pieces as well. Now, some of the skewers actually had some bends in them, so I used that to kind of also decide where I was going to cut them. I did trim off the bottom of my skewers so that they would have a pointy end that I can actually use to stab in. Showing you this really adorable needle kit that my husband had bought me for, I think it was my birthday, and I'm using this piece here to actually create some wide holes into my corks so that my skewers will actually fit down inside them. It is the perfect fit, and you can see as I'm just testing that skewer down in there, and I'm like, yeah, that'll work. So I'm going to go ahead and use that same tool to go into each one of my corks. Now, 2 of these corks that I did were actually cork. And that one, you can tell that the light colored, that's actually that like the composite, it's almost like a plastic. And so it did have a little harder time with the glue, but the beacons is wonderful. And so it did grip. It just took a little bit longer to hold on. And you can see here, I'm just taking my nylon grip pliers and I'm working that way down into that cork. And you see, I'm just continuing that same process with each of my other cork bottoms to get those tree trunks and the base of my trees started. So I took some of my burlap ribbon that I've had and I've used and I've cut pieces off of. I don't want it to fray because I'll be cutting it down quite a bit more. So I'm using a glue mixture, just some Elmer's glue and some water, and I'm going along the edges so when that dries that won't fray, and then I'll go right down the center of this ribbon, and when that dries I'll be able to cut right down the center and have another couple strips. So now this piece of broken cutting board, I went ahead and I sanded the edges where it had broke, and it was just a little rough because it is bamboo and it splintered a little. And I am just using my white chalk paint. I'm going over this because I need it to have a really good coverage. This cutting board was well used. I used it in the kitchen first, and then I used it in crafting, and you can see I've got a big old, I think that's probably Tim Holtz ink on there that is stained on there. And so it's going to take a little bit to cover this up, even with the chalk paint, which is a very good paint. So here you have, it's dried. I took some sandpaper and I went over the top of it. It did well. I wanted to add some greens and add it on in there. It's a little bright for my likings, but my paint's not over here yet. And so I had to use what I had. I used the end of a coffee filter to put it on there because my paint brushes aren't here either. I only had a couple sponge ones, and I used that for the glue. So I used the green, and then I came back over with some browns, and then I came back in with some of my white. And it didn't take much because I wanted it to, they're still damp, and I wanted this to blend, but I wanted it to look as natural as the different colors that you would sneeze that you would see with fresh snowfall. You would see maybe some of the browns from the dirt and maybe some of the greens that were still hanging on from fall. And I'm trying to make some heavier patches where maybe snow would have piled up a little bit, but I didn't want it to be, planned and precise. I wanted it to be very natural as we went on through this process. Each of your trees are going to be a little different because of how tall they are. Their widths are going to be different at the bottom. And so you have to kind of play around with it. Because each of these trees were different, I had no idea what each tree was going to take. So I'm still cutting here for the 2.5 to 3 inches, and I'm just laying it across, cutting, gluing. It's just the same process for each one of our skewered trees. Now, as you get to the top, those pieces are going to need to get smaller. So I went from the 2.5 to 3 inches, and then I went down from the 2 to 2.5, and then I went down from the 1.5 to the 2, all the way to just 1-inch pieces until I had that skewer nice and full all the way up. And I went through all of that ribbon that I had actually cut up, that burlap ribbon, and it was messy. It was a messy task, but I really think it turned out so adorable. It got frustrating fighting that moving around, so I went ahead and took some hot glue and I glued it to the bottom of my cork to my table. And this kind of gives you an idea right here of how much I did cut. So I did 2 piles of 5 each of the 4-inch, that's 10, and then I went to the 3.5, and then to the 3, and to the 2.5, and so it was 10, 10, 10, 10, and on the 1-inch pieces I just did 5. And so it actually worked out well, and now I'm just going to once again use that glue, and you can see I'm not having to wiggle that around or stand it up because I hot glued it down to my table. Now my table is actually covered with a wallpaper, and so it's easy for that hot glue to pop right off. It's easy to clean. I love it. It's an old card table that someone gave me. It had no top on it. It had the plywood. And so I'm like, I can use that. And sure enough, I did. Doing it this way, it gave me leeway to actually show you as I worked on down through each size, using my glue, stacking up each size, and moving on to the next. It made it so much easier doing it this way. Now I just sped this part up because it's just the process of going through one whole tree. And you can see that it didn't take long, but you do need to, add glue and then crisscross your ribbons and just continue to build it up there. But it really didn't take too awful long, and I didn't want to bore you with too much of the same old as you're going through this. And now that it's done, I lean it over and that hot glue pops right off that table. And now look at those. I've got those done, and I think they turned out adorable. Now this is where your vision hopefully starts to come together. Now, when I create something, it doesn't always turn out the way I think it was supposed to, but this one did pretty good. I had a few different ideas in mind of what I wanted to add to it, from just a Christmas scene to a fairy winter scene, and I just kept going because I knew it was in there somewhere. I am not a planner when it comes to a lot of the projects I make. I see it in my head, I kind of try to find a placement for it, and then I just go for it. I write the same way, and it's by the seat of my pants. People say I'm an ADHD crafter, and I'm like, I'm just a crafter. I see something, and I have to get it out of my head. And that's what I've done with this. I know where I kind of want the trees to be, and I think it turned out very well. I'm stepping in here to remind you this is our Talented Creators collaboration. This happens once a month with Aurea from DIY with Aurea and Loli from Loli D's Creations. We have a guest host every month, and this month is Lady Red Crafting. She is a wonderful crafter. I just love to watch her. And don't forget to check out the description box below for our host channels, as well as the playlist of the other talented creators that are participating in this collaboration. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Love you guys, and Merry Christmas. So next thing I have here is some of the jumbo craft sticks. I cut down 1.5 inches, and I'm going to paint that red for the door. I also have some leftover pieces of my skewers, and I cut those down to fit the window, glued them together, and that will be painted red as well. Okay, so now I have my apple barrel red paint, and I'm going to use some on this little piece of cardboard here. And I don't want it a real bright red. I do want it to look like it's been weathered over the years. So I'm going to add a little bit of the chocolate sprinkle brown from Apple Barrel. This is a multi-surface paint, so I can use it on several different projects. Now I don't want it to get super brown, super dark in that red, so I'm just mixing a little bit of it in at a time so that I can be precise when I'm creating the color I want for my door and my window. Now I think that's a good color for what I'm looking for here. I wanted some of the brown to be a little blotchy and the red. I don't want to chip it much. I mean, this is a skewer and it's being glued together. So I don't want to try to make it chippy. Now the door, I'm only doing one side because it's going to glue to the other. Now this is such a simple process here with just the sponge and the paint. Once I get it covered on there, I'm just going to slide it forward and let it dry. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some of my elephant gray chalk paint and I'm just going to do some dabs here and there on this house here. You know, if you've got a home in the middle of the Shire, a lot of those homes weren't looking pristine and painted, just perfect every day. They did look like they had been out there for a while. So I'd used some of that gray on there and I used a little bit of the brown up in the top corners. And then I just came back in with my chalk paint over the top of that and blended those colors down. Now I did this all over the birdhouse except the roof, and we're going to have something different happening with our roof. And I wanted to just show you the painting process, the distressing process of what I'm doing with this little birdhouse. Now you've seen me take just a little skewer there, and I just wanted to put some artificial lines of wood on that house. So now thinking about the roof, I was wanting something definitely different. I didn't want just the plain white roof or just to paint it. And I did have some of this burlap ribbon left over, so I thought I would cut it down into maybe looking like some shingles or some bark shingles, since that's kind of what would be going on in a little cabin someplace out in the wood. They usually would take strips of bark and put that up there on their roofs. All right, so let's get these little bits and pieces of burlap into a shingled roof. So I'm just kind of splitting them up into equal piles so that I know just how many I can use per row. I have my beacons 3-in-1, so this should dry pretty quick and very hard. I'm just going to put a row across that bottom area and then line them up, kind of overlapping them just a little bit. Now remember, this is rustic, and so it does not have to be perfect. People are up there, they're doing it, and they didn't have modern tools. So my glue works pretty well here. I'm just going to continue loading these across, offsetting them to the shingle I did below. And that's why you can see it kind of going over the edge there. And I'm going to do it again right across that next level. And we're just going to continue this across this side of our roof. Now both sides are done, and I'm just going to look at this, make sure everything's glued down. And then comes the dilemma, what am I going to use on the top part? Well, there we go. We have a little bit of a different type of burlap. And what I'm going to do is I am going to try to get it to go down the center a bit, because when you do a house, you put one piece across the top of the house that kind of goes down both sides. But in order to do that, I needed one more like little sheet to cover from the center to where those other shingles started. So I cut that down and glued that across the top there. And then I'm going to go ahead and take that small little piece and go right across the center, sealing that roof up. But I wanted it to still look like shingles there, so I did trim it a little bit, and I will mess with that. It probably would have been better for me to just cut them all at once, but I seat of my pants, guys, crafting by the seat of my pants. So once again, some of my glue across the top, and then a little creased piece of burlap, gluing those pieces down so none of your weather, none of your rain or your snow or any dust will come on in through the top of that roof. And there you have it. The next thing I wanted to do was add some freshly fallen snow to the top of this house. So when I think about the snow falling, I know it's going to gather right on top first, and then it's going to slide down the edge of the roof into that steep roof, and it's going to land and kind of pile up on some of your shingles depending on the ones that are maybe standing out a little further than the others. It's going to attach the door and get that on there, and that can be sitting up while I'm trimming up the window. I just dipped some of my Beacons 3-in-1, and I'm dipping each of my little end pieces of my window frame so that I can pop it right on in that hole. And it was a little difficult to kind of maneuver around there because I needed to get it on each of the little ends of my skewers. And I just grabbed it there with the tweezers. My hands are going to be sticky after this, but it was so worth it. That fit in there just perfect. I held it in there and just pushed it right on into that frame. It was perfect. Now it's time to see everything kind of come together on this board. I just set that little house right in between those trees, and you see the fairies are still sitting on there. I was still just really debating, but it's time to move things aside. I'm doing the same snow technique that I did on the house, and I'm just coming in with that white chalk paint, and I'm coming in rather heavy on them because snow doesn't just slowly go down and leave little thin amounts. It does have heavier spots on your branches. So I wanted to make sure that it looked like the snow had fallen and the trees accumulated the snow where the branches were actually set out on that tree. They're not going to get a lot of snow on the inside, but I tell you, on the outside of those branches, they are going to get some as it falls down. Now I'm coming in with some hot glue. Now what I'm trying to do here is just build up a little bit of glue around those bases of the trees. And I'm not putting it there for stability. I'm actually putting it there to have some snow drifts. So as I kind of blob the glue around on the bottom of these, I'm hoping to get the glue to build up, and then I will paint over that. So now the glue is set, it is dried, it is solid. I'm going to come on in with my white chalk paint again, and I am going to go right over that glue, and that's going to make it look like we have a little snow pile that has drifted up against the base of the trees. I have these little wooden cubes from the Dollar Tree, and I wanted to paint some presents to go under the trees outside, the green bottle brush trees that I had gotten. And so I went ahead and poured some little colors on my lovely little palette here, my coffee filter, and I just poured out some basic colors to wrap my presents, paint my blocks. So I am going to get started here. I have just a little makeup sponge, and I'm just going to daub on the yellow, and I'm just going to move right on through each of these colors. Nothing spectacular, very easy. Different color daubers for the different color paints. So here's where I'm going to just bling it up just a little bit. I have some metallic silver and some metallic gold, and I'm just going to put a little bit on my little squeegee there. And then I'm going to add a little bit of this metallic to each of those squares. First of all, they're a little bright for what I am building up here. I mean, I have some distressed doors and distressed yards, and the trees are burlap. So the bright presents just didn't go along with it. So here we go, just distressing it with bling. How about that? Now I did add 2 coats of the metallic paint to each of these. It helps to dull down the brightness, but it also gave each of the gifts a shimmer that worked perfect with this setting. So I wanted to go ahead and put some bows on these gifts. I tried a couple different ways and decided they're too small for me to make individual bows. So I just cut a length of about 7 to 8 inches, and I wrapped it around like I would a regular gift. So around the top, crisscross on the bottom. Look at that. That was just, yeah, right. Try it again. Around the top, crisscross on the bottom, and bring it back over the top, and then tie it into your little bow. It was still very fiddly for me. I have arthritis hands. I have osteoarthritis, and so some days it just doesn't want to work, especially with these little tiny things. But I gave it my all, and here we are. Now I'm just making sure that it's not too big for that little box, and just fiddling around the edges, make sure it's right where it needs to be. Now I definitely don't want those little bows to come untied, so I put some of my fabric tack glue on that little squeegee I have. I'm taking just a little poker, one of my Cricut tools, and I am adding it to the center of those knots and underneath the knots on those block presents. It will take just a moment to dry, but then I don't have to worry about those coming untied or getting loose on my project. And here we go. Let's start putting the rest of this baby together. So once again, my 3-in-1, actually that's my Fabri-Tac. I'm going to put Fabri-Tac all around the edge. That's going to dry, it's going to grip, and it's not going to go anywhere. But I did put some hot glue in the middle of that because Fabri-Tac does take a little bit longer to dry, so I didn't want it to shift around while I was finishing this. I am using Fabri-Tac on the bottom of my little trees. I put enough on one where I could take it and mush it with the other one and put those right on either side of my little door. And that's going to take a moment to dry, so I'm just going to let them sit there. And then my bigger tree, I'm going to set a little further off to the side because we made those gifts. And so I'm going to put that off to the side a little bit more over by the bigger burlap trees. And then we're going to go ahead and get these gifts ready to go over around the trees. Now, because there's 5 of them, and you know, that tree's still a little bit small compared to those blocks, but this is a outdoor decoration. So think about what you would put outside just for decor at your house around the holiday times. They're not always in proportion, but this I think is going to be just so adorable. So I just trimmed those off a little bit, and I'm going to play with the placement to see what it's going to look like with the colors and the, you know, I didn't paint some of the bottoms, so I wanted to make sure that those were standing up and getting this all right. Well, guys, this is how it turned out, and I'm so excited. I think it turned out absolutely gorgeous. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you would have done anything a little different. I really appreciate you stopping by and spending your precious time with me. Guys, if you've not subscribed yet, I will ask that you will do so, and give this video a like if you like it. It really does help my channel. As always, stay safe, God bless, and bye for now.